What do Sunrise on the Reaping and Watch Me have in common? After releasing some of their most popular books, a lot of authors often go back to those series and release new books, whether it be prequels or sequels for those books. Recently, authors of two of my favorite YA series ever have made a comeback with a sequel and prequel. The first one being a prequel, Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, and the second one being Watch Me, a sequel to the Shatter Me series. These book series are two of my favorites ever written, but I haven't read these series in a very long time, and today I'm going to be discussing whether I think these books were necessary or if they were just fan service. And I'm also going to be giving my overall review on the books in general. To start, I actually finished Sunrise on the Reaping around a month ago, and I really enjoyed it. I rated it 4 stars, and there was some good and some bad to it. For the first part of the book, I honestly felt like it was more fan service. I think it took me a little while to get back into the world. It felt like there were so many connections to other characters that didn't really correlate to the book, because we had mentions of Katniss's father, which I thought felt very fan service, Plutarch Heavensby, and like Effie and some other characters. But the more I got into the book, the more I realized how these people tied in really beautifully, and it sort of made a big impact on who Haymitch was as a person. So I think they were necessary, and the more you read the book, I think the more you'll see that. Overall, for this book, I would 100% say that it was not fan service. After watching the movies again, I saw so many connections to the prequel, and I feel like it truly did enhance the experience a lot, and it was a beautiful book. As for the story overall, I thought it was really moving. I feel like in the Hunger Games, I never felt that bad for Haymitch. It was really hard to connect and relate to him, but after reading this book, you really get why he ended up being the person that he was, and it was truly heartbreaking. For me, at the end, there weren't really any plot twists that really shocked me, because it was kind of expected. We kind of knew what was going to happen to him based on his life in the future, but it definitely still hurt a lot to read it. I actually did not cry until the epilogue, but right when the epilogue hit, I was sobbing the entire way through, literally start to end, tears, just tears. The rest of the book felt sad, but so much of it was expected that it felt harder to get really emotional over it. The one issue I will say that I had with the book, personally, it felt like the writing was a bit more basic and less immersive to me. Like, I feel like the world building wasn't as great as I thought it was going to be, and the overall events that went through the book felt a little choppy. For me, it felt weaker than at least Ballad of Snakes and Songbirds. I haven't read the first 3 books in a while. Ballad of Snakes and Songbirds I read in 9th grade. It's very possible that the level of writing is around the same and I'm just remembering it differently, but if I remember correctly, I think A Ballad of Snakes and Songbirds felt more well developed to me. I don't know, I'm gonna have to revisit those books and give you a more proper opinion on that in the future. For the book overall, I would give it 4 stars, and for whether or not I think it was necessary, I would give it 5 out of 5 stars. I truly do think it enhanced the overall Hunger Games so much, because we learned so much more about Haymitch and about his connections with people like Effie, Katniss's father, even Beetee. I feel like it brings out so much to the book, and it truly did enhance it. I'm actually super duper nervous to start reading this, because Shatter Me has thus far literally been my favorite book series of all time. But I read it when I was in middle school, so I honestly feel like I might not like it as much this time, and I'm really, really worried, because I read a bunch of YA books recently, and I'm not gonna lie, for the most part, they've all been letdowns. I have ruined so many of my favorite book series and movie and like shows by rewatching them or rereading them. So I'm really hoping this will live up to my expectations. Okay, so it's been a few days and now I've officially finished Watch Me, and the rating I gave it was 4 stars. I can very, very, very proudly say I loved this book. And I don't think it's just that I'm being nostalgic. I actually think it was really well written. I think Tara Mafi writes really well, and the storyline is really well thought through, I think. So I really enjoyed it. Obviously, it wasn't full stars, so there were some things I didn't like about it, but we're going to talk about all the good and the bad right now. To start with the good, the first thing that I really liked, as with like all the books, one of the things that really drew me in, the plot and the writing style are very fast-paced. It's a really good book to read if you're in a book slump, because everything goes really quickly. It feels like one of those books where it's like complex enough that you're like, oh, what's going to happen next? But then also it's digestible enough that you want to keep turning the page, and it's like easy to keep reading. So I really enjoy how fast-paced it is, especially as someone who's been in a book slump for a very long time. Reading books like these really help me just like get super immersed into the world, and I feel like I can always imagine the world that Tara Mafi builds really well. So I really enjoyed that. The next thing I really liked was the plot. At first, before I read it, I'm not gonna lie, I was thinking it might be more fan service, because it felt like it wrapped up pretty well, but this went more into like the reestablishment and everything wrong going on there, and the whole topic with claws was really interesting to me, especially with like AI in the modern world. Claws just seemed like such a relevant topic, and I truly think the story was well written. It felt like when Tara Mafi was writing the book, she wasn't just thinking about, oh, how do I incorporate Warner and Juliet in this book such that we see them again. It felt like she was actually thinking about the plot and what needed to be added to the story. It was showing us all of the cruelties behind the reestablishment and like how the war is still sort of ongoing. I think it was really interesting to read about. So I really enjoyed it. And the third thing I really loved was the characters, specifically James. I really, really loved James. He was such a cool and funny and like realistic character. He just felt like a really realistic 21-year-old who was both powerful, really devoted to his family, which I loved, but he also had so much empathy. And I loved his character. I loved so many of the characters, but I really loved his character. Now, there were some things that I didn't like. I would say all of them for the most part were pretty minor, which is why it didn't bring my rating down much. But the things that I did not enjoy. To start, the food scenes. There were so many scenes where Kenji and Adam and Winston were just eating snacks, and let me just pull one up for like reference. So on chapter 18, it was like, Kenji shakes more gummy bears into his palm, chooses 2 red ones, and pops them into his mouth. And then it was like, yeah, I've got apple slices too. And then the whole time throughout the chapter, they were just asking for snacks. Winston took a bite of an apple, and then Kenji was asking for carrot sticks. And I thought there was going to be something important about it later, but it kind of just made me really annoyed. It sort of felt like there was no point to it. It was just like random scenes of them asking for food. I just couldn't understand why we needed the scene in the first place. So that kind of annoyed me, but that was, again, a really small thing. Another thing that was sort of throughout the book that kind of annoyed me was James was really thirsty over Rosabelle the whole time. And there actually wasn't much romance in it. Like, they literally did not touch each other throughout the whole book, but James was just thirsting over her the whole time. Like, I love James, but there were some scenes where it's like, I wish he would focus just a little bit more on the whole reestablishment part and like actually getting information out of her rather than just focusing on, oh my god, she's so hot, you know what I'm saying? But I also didn't think it really made sense why he wanted her so bad, because apparently he was very popular, and like, I get it, he liked her, but like, but why? Why do you like her that bad? You know what I'm saying? I couldn't really get it. The next thing that I didn't really like was how they portrayed Juliet as kind of weak in here. Like, she wasn't mentioned very often, but they just kept talking about how worried they were about Juliet crying. Like, I remember there was a specific scene where they were like, Kenji must be pissed, and then Warner must want to beat me up, and then it was like, and Juliet must be crying, and I was like, I think she's a little more powerful than that now. So I didn't really appreciate how Juliet was written there. It could just also be that I'm forgetting what her character's like, but that kind of annoyed me a little bit. Another thing that I didn't love is they kept mentioning how skinny Rosabelle was, and I wouldn't hate that if they were just mentioning it because of how like malnourished and starved she was, but to me it felt like they were referencing it more to talk about how beautiful she was, which just felt entirely unnecessary to me. On page 25, James said, I grab her on instinct, holding her steady without thinking, but I'm thrown by the feel of her. A waist so small, it seems almost dangerous. And then throughout the book, there were people who were like, oh, she's so tiny, she's so beautiful. So if it was because she's malnourished and they're trying to show how the reestablishment sort of abused her and made her sort of unhealthy, I would get that. But it felt like they were trying to like glorify it. It would mention how she like had barely eaten anything in her life and then talk about how beautiful she was for being skinny. But again, it was like sort of a small thing. It wasn't mentioned that often, so I was able to sort of overlook it, but that was one thing I didn't love. And the final thing that I didn't love, there was one thing at the end that I felt was a little rushed and not super well thought through, and spoilers incoming for anyone who doesn't want those. But for phase 3, it was basically Leon just going up to Rosabelle. He started saying this weird poem, which I thought was going to mean something, but then in the end, he just self-destructed and gave her the vial. And I was just confused because I thought Rosabelle was actually going to figure something out, and the whole reason she was there was to like pay attention. They were talking about how she pays attention to things really well, so I thought she was going to notice something and something was going to happen, but instead Leon just walked right up to her. He self-destructed and just directly handed her the vial. So I was like, why didn't he just do that earlier then? Why did he need to wait until then? And it was just like, why did they even tell Rosabelle to look for him if he was just going to give it to Rosabelle? So that didn't really make sense to me. I also think it didn't make sense that they had other agents in the New Republic, because if they had so many people in the New Republic, why did they even need Rosabelle there in the first place? Like, I know they wanted her gone because of her sister, but it felt unnecessary to do that. They could have just killed her, you know what I'm saying? Like, why did they need to send her there? Especially knowing that they can't control her mind. Like, she could cause so many issues there. And also, just why hadn't they destroyed the New Republic earlier if they were so capable? And they had agents all over. So those were just a few plot holes that didn't make sense to me. However, my overall enjoyment of the book, because of how fast-paced it was, how well-written I think the overall plot was able to sort of outweigh that. So I gave the overall book 4 stars. Now, for whether or not I think the book was fan service, I would say absolutely not. Because I think it was really well developed and trying to show what happens in the aftermath with the reestablishment and the whole war thing. It tied up a lot of loose ends that I had about the reestablishment, which I had sort of forgot about over the years. And I think it actually had like a strong plot. Do I think think it was necessarily needed. Not really. I think everything was for the most part tied up, but for anyone who's like a super fan, I do think it really added to the story in a beautiful way. So my overall rating for Watch Me was 4 stars, and for how necessary I thought it was, I would give it 3 stars. So those are my reviews for Sunrise on the Reaping and Watch Me. In the end, I gave them both 4 out of 5, and I think that they were both beautifully written books that were not fan service and were actually really necessary. I would say Sunrise on the Reaping added more depth to the book. If you had like the whole storyline, I feel like it just made it feel deeper, because after it, I felt more connected with Haymitch and Effie and Plutarch and so many other characters. It really helped you understand everything that happened in the first books a little more. I would say Watch Me, on the other hand, sort of extended the storyline more. It didn't really add more depth to the original plot, but it definitely extended it. It made the story just even greater. Those were the 2 books, and whether or not I thought they were fan service, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!